This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dennis McKinney, director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, kicks off today's show explaining changes that have been made with the Farm Loan Program and what it means for farmers and ranchers. Keeping the show rolling is K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner as he discusses developing heifers and considerations cattle producers should think about. The Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Brian Lubbers ends today's show by conversing about a recent presentation on reducing the use of antibiotics on a cattle operation. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show hearing from the State Director of the USDA Farm Service Agency in Kansas, Dennis McKinney. Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Dennis, wanting to mention first the work that's done with the Farm Service Agency and APHIS.
That's right. The Farm Service Agency, we collaborate with APHIS, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, on a number of measures to address the H5N1 virus that's been picked up in dairy cow herds across the nation. We just have some programs to help mitigate costs and to help make it easier for producers to do early testing, get the diagnoses made, and collaborate with the state veterinarian and the federal vets and get the things done to contain the virus and also to protect workers. So it's just a reminder that dairy producers across the state, check with us. We've got some tools that can help you if you need it.
For dairy producers who think they've had H5N1 in their herd or might possibly have it now, important to go ahead and just check in with the Farm Service Agency?
We'd like to help you, and we work with APHIS to make it easier for the dairy producer to do quick testing, early testing, and take whatever measures needed to protect the herd and protect the workers.
Dennis, something else that's happening at the Farm Service Agency, some changes in the farm loan programs.
That's right. In our farm loan program, we have over 5,000 direct loan borrowers who have an outstanding loan volume of about $1.15 billion across Kansas. We have another almost 1,200 borrowers that are guaranteed borrowers, and that's where we partner with commercial banks to guarantee loans. There's about $444 million of those guaranteed loans out there. So our loan program is very important to providing credit to farmers and ranchers across Kansas, to beginning farmers and ranchers, to those who would have trouble finding credit elsewhere. It's a very effective program, and we have a good relationship partnering with banks across Kansas. Now, right now, it's important because, we have advantageous interest rates right now in this higher interest rate environment. It's also important because we have land prices at record levels, which makes our lower interest rates important. And so we try to point that out, that these are programs to check into if you're getting started farming, if you're struggling to get the credit you need. Come see us. Stop in a Farm Service Agency office. They can direct you to our farm loan office. I would say that right now we have new rules coming in on our farm loan program that I think are very important to make it more useful to farmers and ranchers across Kansas, but also makes it easier for us to partner with banks, commercial banks, and the farm credit system to collaborate to get those loans made, to get the credit out there that people need, which I think is very important. Right now, there's rules are coming down, which means instead of requiring 150% of debt to assets, with the requirements being lowered to 125%, we have changes coming that make it easier for us to structure the loan so that those younger producers will have more liquidity in those first 10, 12 years of their operating. And a lot of us in farming remember those first several years when it seemed like your debt service took up every available penny, and then we didn't have resources available to make purchases or take advantage of opportunities that we faced. And we have measures in place that would make it more where we can more quickly release liens as the debt is paid down, release liens on some of those assets so that a farmer and rancher can use that for commercial borrowing to take advantage of opportunities that come up in their first several years of borrowing. We think, why is this important? Well, like I said, right now we have high land prices. We have to compete with, these young producers have to compete with out-of-state borrowers, many of whom are hunters. They're buying up land. We look at the demographics across Kansas, farmers and ranchers typically as a group are getting older. We need to get new people started in the business. We want to maintain a family-based system of ag production in Kansas, and we need new people really to get in there and take the reins and take that up. The other thing I mentioned, I'm old enough to remember some of the lessons we learned from the 1980s. I remember what it was like during the late 70s, the very early 80s. Things looked awfully good, and all of a sudden, boom, 4 years later, we were in the midst of a huge farm crisis. It's important to get those loans structured correctly so that our younger producers can survive the tough times more easily, or as opportunities come up during the tough times, take advantage of them. People that had any liquidity at all during those times in the 1980s were able to buy land, and they never regretted that decision. We want to help our producers get structured. They can survive tough times, take advantage of opportunities, and survive into the future. And that's why we're working on this. On direct farm ownership loans, our interest rates right now are running about 5.5%. We have a program called joint financing where you partner with the commercial lender, and our rates on that are about 3.5%. We have some other programs that get down as low as 1.5%. But the main thing is that we're making some changes now to help producers get their loan structured better so that the debt service doesn't take up all their pennies of available money, and they can operate better going forward.
How does this impact people who already have loans with the Farm Service Agency?
Well, mainly it will help them structure those loans so that they will have liquidity going forward in those next few years, and they'll be able to operate, take advantage of opportunities, take care of their land, and basically make their farm more sustainable going forward. So it will be benefit both to new borrowers and to our existing borrowers. Main thing is that the loan security requirements enable the borrowers to leverage their equity a little bit better, reduce the amount of additional security required for direct farm loans, in most cases from 150% down to 125%, and will allow them to take advantage of the opportunities they have.
And an acronym that always goes with the Farm Service Agency, CRP, and what's happening with the CRP right now?
Our continuous CRP sign-up is still going on to be considered for the next batch of continuous CRP offers. Those need to be in and approved by September 30th. So if you think you want to make an offer, don't wait. And our national office is batching those offers in order that they can follow the acres being offered and not exceed the 27 million acre nationwide cap on CRP. That's federal law caps that at 27 million acres. We're very close to that. So they're gathering up the continuous CRP offers into batches to make sure that we don't exceed that cap. I would mention also, Shelby, the CRP payments are scheduled for October 2nd, October 9th. So if you have CRP payments coming, we should be able to get those out in October, provided that we have appropriations that allow us to operate and keep our offices open.
Speaking of keeping the Farm Service Agency operating, why might producers want to call in to the Farm Service Agency after October 1st when it comes to FSA programs?
Presently, our appropriations in the Farm Bill expire on September 30th. So after that, if you want to do something in the farm program, please call our office first and see what authority we have to operate under. And that way we'll have a better idea of how well we can serve you and what things we can do for you. So just give our folks a call at your local FSA office before you get started, and we'll coordinate our efforts.
And Dennis, as always, wanting to remind people where they can always find out more information about programs with the Farm Service Agency.
We have a good website there at Farmers.gov. I always encourage people call your local FSA office. Folks are really committed to good quality public service, and they'll help you out. And I'd just also say across all of our 96 service centers in Kansas, I think there's a general understanding that we have the privilege of working with the world's best farmers and ranchers on programs that improve wildlife habitat, that reduce erosion, and most importantly, help our nation have the safest and most abundant food supply in the world.
Dennis, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some things happening with the Farm Service Agency.
Thank you very much.
That was the State Director of the USDA Farm Service Agency in Kansas, Dennis McKinney. As always, you can find out more information about programs from the Farm Service Agency by going to Farmers.gov or by going to your local service center. If you don't know where your local service center is, I will put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net, where you can use the locator on Farmers.gov to figure out where the nearest one is to you. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Kansas Livestock Association's Scarlett Madinger as she discusses how nominations are now being accepted for the 2025 NCBA Environmental Stewardship Award. This award recognizes outstanding stewardship practices and conservation achievements of cattle producers from across the nation.
Any individual, group, or organization is eligible to nominate a person or business raising or feeding cattle for the Environmental Stewardship Award. Individuals and families may not nominate themselves, although nominees should be involved in preparing the application. Past nominees are encouraged to resubmit applications. However, previous winners may not reapply. Along with a typed application, 1 nomination letter and 3 letters of recommendation highlighting the nominee's leadership and conservation are required. There is a new application deadline of February 17, 2025. Award winners are selected by a committee of representatives from universities, the cattle industry, conservation organizations, as well as federal and state agencies. The judges consider the management of water, wildlife, vegetation, air, and soil, along with leadership abilities and the sustainability of the business. Regional winners will be recognized at the 2026 CattleCon in Nashville, Tennessee, and the national winner will be announced later that year. The Environmental Stewardship Award is an initiative of NCBA and the National Cattlemen's Foundation and is made possible with generous support from the National Resources Conservation Service, Corteva Agriscience, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. For more information or to download the nomination packet, go to environmentalstewardship.org. I'm Scarlett Madinger.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner as he talks with us about developing heifers. We're now cutting to that short break. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Wednesday show discussing heifer development considerations with K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner. Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Shelby. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, as always.
Jason, why is this something that we might want to be thinking about this time of year for cow-calf operations?
Heifer development is a really important aspect of the overall cow-calf enterprise, and that fits for both commercial and seed stock producers as well. And really, I think, of course, this year we're, again, kind of in a unique situation, I think, from a heifer retention standpoint. And when we think about the decisions that I think a lot of producers are going to be making going into the end of this year and into the start of 2025, there's some really important considerations there. When we take a step back and we look at 2024, we have not seen broadly as an industry any indication that the industry is taking steps to retain females and grow the cow herd, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But when we look at our proportion of heifers in the total mix of cattle that are on feed and feedlots right now, really throughout most of the year, we've been running anywhere from mid-30s, 35, 36, up to like 37, 38%, which is historically pretty high. So we're just not really seeing any indication that the industry is really taking steps yet to grow the cow herd. And so, what does that mean from the standpoint of replacement heifer decisions? Is that something that each producer is going to have to uniquely work through? How is that going to fit within their operation? I guess the one comment that I'll make is that when we think about, from a price standpoint, we think about retaining heifers. Well, if we've got slaughter cows or cull cows that are bringing anywhere from $1.15 to maybe $1.30, $1.40, depending on the weight and the flesh on those cows, it's pretty easy to sell those cows and not get real aggressive about wanting to retain females back, and especially if we've got some dry conditions staring us in the face. And so just a lot of things that certainly that are on the mind of a lot of producers this year as we work forward to it for 2025. But I think the most important thing is, regardless if you're a seed stock or a commercial producer this year, really understand and get a good handle on what your production costs are going to be to develop those females into replacements next year. And then as we think about getting those females bred and carrying them on into a bred female coming into the cow herd. As I think about it, if we look at prices this year, if we've got a 500-pound heifer and just using broad USDA averages for right now here in mid-September, if we can get her priced in at $260 a pound, so we would have anywhere from maybe $1,250 up to about $1,300 per head in initial cost in that female, just as a calf herself. That's just her value herself. And then when we think about the development costs on top of that, we can have anywhere from maybe $350 on up to about $450 just in feed costs and yardage costs in that heifer as well too. If we think about the scenario, if we've got to grow her from, let's just say, the 1st of October out till the 1st of May when we get her bred, so about 200 days, and if we can do that for $1.85 to maybe $1.90 per head per day. So we can easily we think about taking those females and getting them into the replacement group or the replacement herd to start the breeding season next year to get those females bred up to about $1,700 in those females at that point. And then when we think about the development costs from there on forward to get them pregnant and get them entering in the cow herd in the spring of 2026, we can easily have well over $2,000 in these females just for them entering the herd as a 2-year-old. So I think the important message is to really just take a good holistic approach at your overall look at your overall replacement heifer program. If there's some opportunities in there where we can maybe save some costs on some feed inputs and decrease our costs during that time period without sacrificing performance and reproduction, those I think are the key things that we really want to look at, because it's easy, I think, right now when feeder calf prices are high to think that we might be able to afford a higher price on those females. But the thing we want to keep in mind is that long term, if we can decrease our initial cost and our investment cost in those females when we bring them back into the herd overall, because we know that feeder calf price is going to change over the course of time, if we can try to keep that cost relatively low or as low as we can, that's more economical for us in the long run.
When we're looking at those heifers, if producers have decided to keep a few more, what are some things that they might want to think about?
I think it's really important to always just go back and look at calving records and specifically look at calving dates. If we can try to identify those females that are born early in that calving season, we know that there is some potential ability for us to be able to indirectly select for some reproductive performance and some reproductive efficiency there. If we can find those females that are born early on in the calving season that came from those females that conceived themselves early on in the breeding season and subsequently calved early in the calving season. And so being able to do that, I think, is really important. Certainly if you're keeping registered females, that's one thing. But if you're keeping commercial females as well, too, regardless, just look at those basic calving records, being able to identify if a female came from a cow that's got any teat and udder issues, teat and udder conformation issues or disposition issues, or if she was thin at the start of the calving season, being able to avoid keeping females from those cows, of course, is certainly important. At the same time, too, I think just going through the basic things of looking at what's the target weight that you're going to try to develop those females to at first service or at first breeding, and then back calculate what your nutrition program or plan needs to be on those females throughout that development period and structure it accordingly so that we target the right amount of gain on those females.
And when it comes to development, does it make a difference on how they're developed?
Well, certainly when we think about rates of gain in between weaning and up till the start of the breeding season, we know that can potentially have an impact there as well, too. Really, when you take a look at it, most of the research would tell us that most broadly that having those females develop somewhere between 65 to maybe 67% of their mature weight, their expected mature weight as a mature cow at the time of first service is really ideal from both an economic as well as a reproduction standpoint. And certainly there would be some more recent data out there that might suggest that we might be able to develop those heifers a little bit lighter to a lighter target weight at the start of the breeding season. But the thing that we want to keep in mind is that on average the data would tell us that from the standpoint of achieving the most optimal reproductive rate and therefore having a good opportunity for those females to retain in the herd in multiple years following that first pregnancy, developing them out to that proper rate, that 65 to 67% or 2/3 of mature body weight at breeding is really ideal. And so there's a number of ways where we can do that. And regardless if those heifers are going to be out grazing a low quality forage resource here during the fall and in the winter months, or if we're going to have those heifers in a pen situation, we're going to be feeding them a TMR, or if they're on free choice hay with a supplement. However you do that, if we design the rate of gain properly during that time period so we can grow those females without them being overly conditioned at the start of the breeding season, that will give us the best opportunity to have a good chance of reproductive success in those females.
Is this a scenario where maybe you want to work with a nutritionist?
Absolutely. We just encourage folks to just take a good overall approach and just look at their program and identify if there's some ways that they can improve. And that's where having subsequent records and being able to go back for the last 2-3 years and look at, okay, what's our overall pregnancy rate been in our replacement heifers when we've developed them in this manner? Are there some ways that we can improve or maybe just decrease our cost of production there during that time period? It's a really, really critical overall period of time when we think about just the growth and development of those females. And so absolutely we encourage folks to work with an advisor on that, whether that's somebody in an extension or a feed service provider or a nutritionist, whoever that person is, to just help guide them in that plan and look for opportunities there and just make sure that they're setting themselves up to be successful.
Jason, is there any reason that cattle producers would hold back more heifers than they were planning on?
Certainly if you think about if you develop those females and you retain a few more of those females back than what you typically would, that allows you to offset if you got a higher rate of reproductive failure or a greater rate of fallout in those females than what you typically would. So, again, I mentioned developing these heifers up to about 65 to 67% of their mature weight at breeding is a good target weight for them to be at. The data would generally tell us if we develop them out to a lighter weight, there's a greater risk of reproductive failure and those females not conceiving in that first service or that second consecutive service. And so if that's the case, if we develop those heifers to a little bit lighter weight, then, I think there's opportunity there if we can keep a few more of those females back, recognizing that there might be a greater risk of fallout and reproductive failure in that group or in that situation. That's a time period where maybe a producer would want to explore doing that. And, when you think about it, if you can decrease some costs there during that development period, well, if you've just developed that female out as a yearling, she doesn't breed for you in that initial breeding season. But if she can fit, if you can easily market her into a feeder yearling type of a program, she's got a lot of value for you there in that time of the year. And so, and there'd be examples out there in the industry where that works fairly well. So that's something to keep in mind if folks are looking at, well, can we capitalize on the low feeder calf inventory that's out there? If there's going to be demand for these females in certain areas and try to retain a few more of them back, that's an opportunity where that can potentially fit.
What are some resources that producers could look into if they have more questions?
We've got a number of resources available in our local county or district extension offices. Feel free to reach out to your local extension professional there in those office units, as well as your area beef cattle specialist. KSUbeef.org is our main extension website for all things beef cattle related here at Kansas State, and so I encourage you to take a look at that website as well too for resources and information.
Jason, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby. Appreciate it.
That was K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner. I will link the resources that he mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we'll have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we round out our Wednesday show with the Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Dustin Pendell, Brian Lubbers, and Bob Larson.
I wanted to talk about antimicrobial use measures, and Bob, you and I were at a conference where Dr. John Groves from Missouri made a presentation, and maybe just to start us out, give us a brief synopsis of what he talked about.
His talk was really, I'm going to maybe go off a little bit of what you were talking, because it's not specifically about antimicrobial use, but it was about talking to his clients. He had a client that came up to him and said, I think we're using too much antibiotic. I'd like to use less. And so that's a time frame where the veterinarian and the producer sit down and talk about, well, why do you see that as a problem? What would you like to accomplish? How are we going to get there? And so one of the things that I took from his talk was that is a good client-veterinary relationship where they're really trying to achieve some goals. They've identified goals, they're trying to achieve them, and they work together to do that. And he kind of came up with I don't know exactly the best way to do this, so we're going to just start counting. So they started counting just how many times they used an antibiotic. They didn't specify identify, so basically they didn't care in their counting whether it was in the feed or an injection. They didn't care which injectable antibiotic it was. They just counted how many times that an animal received an antibiotic and started keeping records. And it's kind of because they didn't know exactly what they wanted to count so they got started.
Dustin, this kind of fits with a lot of things you do relative to how are we going to change our management.
Right. So just Bob mentioned it, you got to collect the data, right? It's hard to manage something if you aren't measuring the data. And so, yeah, it just starts with collecting data, and then as they went along, they figure out, hey, we should maybe tweak this, or that way we can report this later.
And Brian, does that make sense to you? Because you've done a lot of research in this area.
Yeah, we have done a lot with use metrics here at K-State, and I would say get started, yes, as long as you have some sort of objective. So the example that Dr. Groves gave and Bob summarized here is they felt like they were using too much. And so in that case, their measure or their metric is really kind of a proxy for disease pressure and use too, right? So you can envision a scenario where there's lots of use, but there's also lots of disease pressure and it's appropriate. And there's also a scenario where there's lots of use and maybe we could cut back and not negatively affect our outcomes. And so if your objective is to compare your use to a different system, which was not the case here, you might actually pick a different metric. So, there's several different metrics we talk about. So regimens, so that's each time that an animal receives a course of therapy, we'll call it that, that counts as one. So that's a good metric in this case because it's just kind of a general, like, how much are we using? And it doesn't matter which drug you use. A regimen is a regimen as long as you've defined it in your system. The downside to regimens is that you have to have good records to track that. You can use milligrams or total drug as a metric in a system. The problem is that different drugs have different potencies, and so you can actually manipulate those metrics by using a more potent drug, which is fewer milligrams per dose, or if you're just doing it within your system, it makes it complicated if you use a mix of antibiotics. And so, you can do it. And that one's a little easier if, you have just receipts. You can use, or what we call their trash can audit. So you put an empty trash can and the only thing that goes in there is used drug containers. And at some point in time, whether it's monthly or quarterly, you go up and you count, okay, how many containers of drug X did we use? And that's one way to measure. It's from a record point. It's the simplest, right? As long as everybody is throwing all the used containers in one bucket, but it does take a little labor on the backside, and the metrics are more complicated again if you're using multiple antibiotics in the system, and you really can't compare across systems.
So I think you guys have some great points here relative to kind of the old Nike slogan, just do it, right? Just start measuring, using those regimens or doing the trash can audit as you talked about. And that measurement will at least give you a baseline if you decide to change. So great comments. Appreciate your feedback there.
That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Thursday.